Becoming the strongest version of yourself doesn't start in the gym or in a library. It starts by shattering the lie you were raised on. For your entire life, you've been programmed to believe that strength and intelligence are opposites. Every cartoon you watched as a kid shoved this into your brain: the big dumb jock versus the skinny nerd. One was muscle without brains, the other brains without muscle. Society told you to pick a side, because the last thing they wanted was someone who embodied both, someone dangerous, someone complete. But history laughs at this lie. The greatest men weren't one-dimensional. They were warriors who wrote poetry, philosophers who fought battles, artists who could wrestle soldiers into the dirt. Yet in our modern world, the very idea of uniting mind and body is mocked. Go to the gym, and you're called shallow. Spend your time reading, and you're soft. You've been tricked into thinking you can either lift weights or lift ideas, but not both. And that programming has left you operating at half capacity your entire life. Miyamoto Musashi, Japan's deadliest samurai, proved this false division was a prison. He won more than 60 duels to the death, yet between battles he wrote poems, painted masterpieces, and recorded one of the most influential strategy books in history. He showed that true strength comes from refusing to separate what society insists must stay apart. And that's why today, you're about to see how much of your power has been stolen from you, and why reclaiming it requires burning this lie to the ground. History destroys the myth. If you zoom out for just 5 seconds, the lie you grew up with collapses instantly. This idea that brains and brawn are two separate paths, that you can only be one or the other, it's not just false, it's embarrassingly recent. For thousands of years, the complete man was expected to be both. To separate body from mind would have been seen as a defect, even a disgrace. Take the samurai. These weren't just killers with swords. Every samurai was required to master calligraphy with the same hands that slit throats. Their poetry was expected to be as sharp as their blade work. In their world, if you had skill with a weapon but couldn't compose verse, you weren't considered honorable. The reverse was true as well. A refined poet who couldn't defend himself physically was incomplete. An embarrassment. That's why Musashi, after slaughtering 60 men in duels, still spent his nights sketching birds, writing philosophical treatises, and meditating on aesthetics. The samurai ideal was integration, not division. The Greeks knew this too. You love to quote Plato in arguments, but you probably didn't know that Plato wasn't even his real name. His birth name was Aristocles, but his wrestling coach gave him the nickname Plato, meaning broad, because of his massive shoulders and powerful build. This philosopher, you imagine sitting in a toga under a tree, lost in thought, was actually throwing men across sandpits and smashing skulls in competition. And his teacher, Socrates, wasn't some fragile old man with a quill. He fought as a hoplite soldier in 3 brutal campaigns, standing shoulder to shoulder with warriors while carrying a spear and shield heavier than most of you could lift today. Philosophy and physical strength weren't rivals. They were brothers. Look further. Leonardo da Vinci, often worshipped as the peak of intellectual genius, wasn't a frail, skinny tinkerer in a workshop. Contemporary accounts describe him bending horseshoes with his bare hands. He was known as much for his imposing physique as for his designs of flying machines. This man dissected corpses to study anatomy during the day, and then trained his body into a force of nature at night. For him, strength and intellect were simply 2 languages of the same truth. And it's not just the icons of history. Look at the cultures themselves. The Romans demanded their citizens serve in the military before entering politics. The Vikings composed poetry as easily as they split skulls. In almost every ancient civilization, the idea of being all mind with no body would have been a joke, and being all body with no mind would have been considered barbaric. The true elite, the kings, the philosophers, the warlords were those who mastered both. So what changed? Why, in the last 100 years, did we suddenly start believing this split was natural? Because it benefits those in power. If you believe you can only be smart or strong, then you'll never unite the two and become truly independent. A society of people with brilliant minds trapped inside weak bodies is a society that's easy to control. You can invent, calculate, design, but you can't rebel. You can think about freedom, but you can't fight for it. That's why this myth of separation was pushed so hard. Schools, movies, even children's cartoons repeated the same script. The jock was always an idiot. The nerd was always weak. And you laughed along, not realizing your brain was being hardwired for mediocrity. Musashi's life itself is the nail in the coffin for this lie. Here was a man who embodied integration to such an extreme that his enemies couldn't process it. He wasn't the strongest swordsman technically. He wasn't the most artistic poet, but the combination of both made him unstoppable. Imagine facing a man who could outfight you with raw power and then outthink you with ruthless strategy. That's why he never lost. His philosophy, his training, his art, it wasn't separate categories. It was one system. A system designed to make him untouchable. And that's why you've been tricked into believing the opposite. Because if you knew this truth, if you really understood it, you'd realize how much of your potential has been stolen. You'd realize that every time you dismissed your body as unimportant or sneered at physical training as meathead stuff, you were cutting yourself in half. You weren't protecting your intellect. You were burying it. You weren't saving time. You were shackling your mind inside a weak vessel. History didn't separate body and mind. We did, or more accurately, they did. The ones who benefit from a population that can think but not act, that can dream but not fight, that can imagine but never execute. And the cost of that lie isn't just weakness, it's failure. Which brings us to the modern tragedy. People like Matthew, men and women who think they're maximizing their potential because they've mastered one side, not realizing they're limping through life at 40% capacity. But the real consequences of this weakness, they don't show up in theory, they show up in the moment. Your body betrays your mind, and that's exactly what happened next. The modern victim of the lie. It's easy to talk about samurai and philosophers from centuries ago, but what does this lie look like in our modern world? What happens when someone buys into the separation between mind and body completely? And that's where Matthew comes in. On paper, Matthew had everything. He was brilliant, respected, the kind of man people went to when they needed a solution nobody else could find. His co-workers praised his sharp mind, his ability to strategize, his talent for breaking down complex systems. He had spent years cultivating his intellect. Books, theories, frameworks, mental models. Every hour of his life was invested into sharpening his brain, because he truly believed this was the highest form of power. And for a while, it seemed to be working. His career was climbing. His reputation was solid. His ideas were ahead of their time. But there was one part of his life he dismissed entirely: his body. Exercise was for meatheads. Sports were for the kids who couldn't hack it in academics. To Matthew, the gym was a place where shallow people wasted hours flexing in mirrors while their brains rotted. He actually laughed at the idea of lifting weights, saying things like, "Why should I waste time on my biceps when I could be reading a book that changes how I think?" And he wasn't joking. He genuinely believed he had found the ultimate life hack. Focus only on the mind, and you'll reach the top faster. What he didn't realize was that he had been tricked, that by ignoring his body, he was quietly sabotaging the very intelligence he was so proud of. He thought he was operating at 100%, but in reality, he was closer to 40%. His brilliant brain was locked inside a vessel that couldn't cash the checks it was writing, and the cracks began to show in the moments that mattered most. Picture this: Matthew is sitting in a boardroom, about to pitch an idea that could transform his company. He's done the research, built the model, prepared the slides. On paper, his idea is revolutionary, but when the spotlight turns to him, his body betrays him. His palms start sweating. His heart pounds against his ribs like a drum. His voice trembles. His hands shake. The more he tries to control it, the worse it gets. And suddenly, the genius in his head can't make it out of his mouth. His body is choking his brilliance into silence. The tragedy: he wasn't being outsmarted by his competition. He was being outbodied. The man who won the promotion that day wasn't half as intelligent as Matthew. His ideas were simple, even obvious, but he delivered them with a steady voice, strong posture, and calm presence. His body carried his words like a weapon, while Matthew's body collapsed under the pressure. And that's when the brutal truth hit. It didn't matter how sharp his ideas were, if the vessel carrying them was weak. But the betrayal went even deeper than that. Matthew began noticing that his constant fatigue, his restless mind, his inability to focus weren't just personality quirks. They were symptoms. A weak body doesn't just limit what you can do physically, it poisons your mental state. Low testosterone, high cortisol, poor circulation, shallow breathing. Biology itself turns against you. He thought his lack of focus was a problem of willpower. He thought his anxiety before meetings was just how his brain worked. In reality, his weak body was strangling his mind. This is the part nobody tells you. Living in a weak body means you live through a constant fog. You sit down to work after a fresh cup of coffee, ready to go deep, but you can't focus. Your mind races, but produces nothing. You think the solution is another productivity app, another caffeine hit, another time management system. Wrong. The solution was always movement, strength, training. But Matthew didn't know this. He thought ignoring his body made him sharper, when in reality, it was dulling him, crushing his potential, and slowly turning him into a prisoner of his own head. And the worst part, Matthew thought he was winning. He believed he was ahead of everyone else because of his intellect. But behind the surface, he was losing battles nobody else could see. Battles against his own biology, battles against his own presence, battles against opportunities slipping through his fingers because his body couldn't support the weight of his ambition. Then one night, after another humiliating meeting, where he froze under pressure and watched someone else walk away with credit, his friend handed him a book, the Book of 5 Rings, Musashi's timeless manual of combat and philosophy. Inside the cover, his friend had written a single note: "You're trying to win battles with half an army." For the first time in his life, Matthew stopped and realized the truth. His army of intellect was vast, disciplined, and brilliant. But the other half, his body, was missing in action. No wonder he kept losing. No wonder his victories always turned into losses at the finish line. He wasn't cursed, and he wasn't broken. He was incomplete, and that was about to change. But here's the thing about waking up to a lie that's been running your life. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Matthew had to face the truth. Most men never do. He wasn't operating at his peak. He was operating crippled. And the cost of that weakness wasn't just embarrassment in boardrooms. It was every dream, every idea, every ambition being buried alive before it had a chance to breathe. What came next wasn't just a workout routine. It was a war against his programming, against his weakness, against the voice that had been whispering to him his whole life. Strength doesn't matter. The mind is everything. And when Matthew finally decided to test this lie, he discovered something Musashi knew 4 centuries ago. The way is in training. The hidden cost of weakness. But most people think weakness only costs them in the gym or on the field. You think it's about whether you can lift a certain weight or run a certain distance. But the real cost of weakness isn't physical at all. It's mental. It's invisible. And it's eating away at you every single day. When your body is weak, your mind doesn't operate at full capacity. This isn't philosophy, it's biology. A body that lacks strength is a body swimming in cortisol, the stress hormone that clouds thinking and keeps you on edge. A weak body struggles to regulate testosterone, the hormone that fuels confidence, assertiveness, and drive. Blood doesn't flow as efficiently to your brain, starving it of oxygen, which means your ability to focus, to think clearly, to make bold decisions, all begins to crumble. You think you're protecting your intelligence by avoiding the gym, but in reality, you're suffocating it. That restlessness you feel when you sit down to work, when your mind races but never lands on anything, that isn't because you need more caffeine. It's not because you haven't found the right productivity hack. It's because your body is screaming for movement. That jittery inability to sit still is your biology trying to drag you back to what you were designed to do. Push, lift, run, sweat, suffer, and grow. Matthew lived this reality daily. He would show up at the office with a brilliant idea that could change the game. But every time he needed to present it, anxiety would eat him alive. His heart would slam in his chest. His throat would tighten. His hands would tremble. His body betrayed him not because he lacked knowledge, but because it wasn't conditioned to handle pressure. His nervous system was untrained. His biology was fighting against him, instead of supporting him. And here's the brutal truth. When your body can't act, your mind spins. That's why weak men overthink. That's why they spiral into analysis paralysis. Why they hesitate in moments that demand action. Deep down, your mind knows your body isn't ready to handle the consequences of bold choices. So it protects you by paralyzing you. It buries you in theory, in strategy, in endless thinking. You become the guy with 1,000 ideas and 0 execution. The guy who talks about what could be, but never lives it. Weakness doesn't just limit you, it robs you of courage. That's the graveyard where most brilliant minds end up. Not defeated by lack of intelligence, but by lack of presence. Not crushed by their ideas, but by their inability to act on them. They become prisoners of their own thoughts, haunted by the gap between what they know and what they can actually do. And every day they stay weak. That gap grows wider, until eventually, it swallows their potential whole. This was Matthew's nightmare. He had strategies that could have revolutionized his company, but they died inside him. He had visions of businesses he could have built, risks he could have taken, paths he could have carved, but his body vetoed them all. He thought he was playing life at the highest level, when in reality, he was fighting battles with one hand tied behind his back. That's why Musashi's words hit him so hard. In the Book of 5 Rings, Musashi didn't say, "The way is in thinking." He didn't say, "The way is in planning." He said, "The way is in training." Not because he dismissed thought, but because he knew thought without embodiment is useless. Strategy, without the strength to execute, is just fantasy. Wisdom without presence is ignored. A sharp mind in a weak body is like a sword locked in a rusted scabbard. It will never see battle. Musashi understood something most modern men have forgotten. Your body is your mind's ally, or it's your mind's enemy. Train it, and it becomes a weapon that amplifies your intelligence. Neglect it, and it becomes a parasite that drains your clarity, your confidence, your power. That's why Musashi didn't just practice sword drills in a dojo. He lived in caves. He climbed mountains in winter. He stood under freezing waterfalls until his muscles locked and his lungs screamed. He pushed his body to exhaustion every single day, because he knew the body and mind aren't separate. They're one system, and the strength of that system is always determined by its weakest part. Matthew had to face this reality head-on. His brilliant mind wasn't enough, because his body was a liability. His biology was turning his genius into fog, his courage into hesitation, his opportunities into dust. And for the first time, he realized the problem wasn't that he needed more books, more theories, more ideas. What he needed was training. What he needed was to forge his body into something his mind could finally trust. That's when he decided to test Musashi's philosophy. No more hiding behind excuses. No more convincing himself that brains are enough. He walked into the gym, and what happened on that first day changed him forever. The way of training. Your day one was a humiliation. Matthew dropped to the floor, determined to start simple push-ups by rep 5. His arms shook violently. By rep 8, his form collapsed into the ground. He couldn't hit 10. This was the man who colleagues describe as a genius strategist, a man with answers for everything, defeated by gravity and his own body weight. He lay there, chest burning, ego crushed, wondering how he could command respect in boardrooms when he couldn't even command his own muscles. But then something strange happened. Later that evening, when the soreness set in and the humiliation still stung, his mind felt different, clearer. He wasn't more tired, he was sharper. It was as if someone had wiped condensation off the glass through which he'd always been thinking. For the first time in years, he sat down to work without his thoughts racing uncontrollably. The exhaustion of his body had silenced the noise in his head. He realized something books had never taught him. Exhaustion could create clarity. Musashi understood this centuries earlier. His approach to training wasn't about vanity, muscles, or appearance. It was survival. It was truth. He trained with 2 swords when everyone else used 1. Twice the weight, twice the exhaustion, twice the pain. People called him insane, but there was method to the madness. His body was being forced to evolve, and with it his mind. Every swing under exhaustion rewired him to stay calm under chaos. Every repetition was a duel against himself, fought in silence. Matthew began to see the same thing. At first, the workouts felt impossible. He couldn't lift, couldn't run, couldn't breathe without feeling like his chest was caving in. But he kept going back. And by week 3 he noticed the fog lifting more often. The endless analysis paralysis, the overthinking that paralyzed him, was fading. Instead of debating a problem in his head for hours, he found answers clicking into place in minutes. The weights were teaching him what books couldn't: decisiveness. By month 3, Matthew's body still wasn't impressive by any means, but his mind was transforming. Under the barbell, there's no negotiation. You can't overthink gravity. Either you lift it, or it crushes you. That brutal honesty bled into the rest of his life. Decisions that used to terrify him now seemed simple. Risks that used to paralyze him now looked manageable. The iron was teaching him lessons no seminar, no theory, no mentor had ever given him. This was the very philosophy of Musashi. He believed training was not about technique alone, but about breaking the barrier between body and mind until they were indistinguishable. That's why he didn't spend his life in polished dojos, safe and comfortable. He lived in caves, braved snow-covered mountains, and stood beneath waterfalls until his body nearly shut down. He deliberately sought discomfort because he knew comfort breeds weakness, and weakness poisons the mind. By month 8, Matthew had learned what Musashi had known all along. Physical training is mental training. Squats weren't just building his legs, they were teaching him how to rise under crushing pressure. Deadlifts weren't just strengthening his back, they were teaching him how to carry burdens without buckling. Failed reps weren't just physical collapses, they were lessons in humility, resilience, and the courage to return stronger. Every exercise was a metaphor brought to life through pain. The results became undeniable. At work his presence shifted. He didn't force it. His posture had improved. His voice steadied. His eyes held focus. People began saying things like, "Something's different about you, but I can't explain what." The truth was simple. His body and mind had begun to integrate. The separation was dissolving. But the biggest war wasn't against the weights. It wasn't against gravity. It was against the voice in his head. The same voice every man hears in the middle of suffering. "Just quit. You've done enough. Go home." In those moments, Matthew realized the iron was only the stage. The real duel was internal. Every rep was a battle against surrender, and every victory over that voice was a victory that spilled into every corner of his life. This was Musashi's path. Train the body so brutally that the mind has no choice but to evolve. Push until weakness breaks, and what's left is a man who can't be rattled, who can't be shaken. Because once you've survived hell in the gym, once you've stood under that crushing bar and refused to bow, the chaos of life looks small in comparison. Matthew was no longer the strategist, trapped inside a fragile vessel. He was becoming someone new. His ideas hadn't changed, but now they carried weight. His intelligence hadn't grown, but now it had a vehicle strong enough to deliver it. He was transforming from incomplete into whole. But Musashi knew something. Matthew was only beginning to realize. When body and mind fuse through suffering, the transformation runs deeper than strength or focus. It touches something eternal, something unshakable. And that's exactly what was about to happen next. The transformation, in month 10. Matthew wasn't just stronger, he was unrecognizable. But the change wasn't in his muscles, it was in his presence. He didn't walk into rooms trying to project confidence. Confidence radiated off him like heat. His voice no longer cracked, his posture no longer collapsed, his eyes no longer darted nervously around the table. He spoke with the same intelligence he always had, but now his words carried a weight that made people stop and listen. What changed? Not the information in his head, not the strategies in his notebooks. What changed was that he had gone to war with the most dangerous enemy a man can face, the voice inside. You know, the one, the constant whisper that shows up every time you push yourself to the edge. Quit. You've done enough. Why suffer? What's the point? Go home. That voice doesn't just appear in the gym. It appears in every critical moment of life. When you're about to take a risk, when you're about to confront someone, when you're about to step into the unknown, it's there, begging you to retreat. Most people obey it. They've been obeying it for so long that they think it's part of who they are. But here's the truth. That voice is the gatekeeper between who you are and who you could be. And Matthew had finally learned to kill it, rep by rep. Every time he forced out one more push-up, one more squat, one more deadlift, when his lungs screamed and his muscles burned, he wasn't just training his body, he was training his will. He was teaching himself that he could look the voice in the eye, hear its pleading, and move anyway. And once you learn to defeat that voice in the gym, you carry that weapon everywhere. When Matthew walked into meetings, the same inner voice tried its tricks. Don't speak up. What if you embarrass yourself? Stay quiet. Play it safe. But now he recognized it instantly. He had heard that voice under the barbell, under crushing weight, begging him to stop. He knew it was a liar, and just like in the gym, he pushed forward. His body didn't betray him anymore. His mind didn't spiral anymore. For the first time, they worked as one. This was the transformation Musashi had written about centuries earlier. Musashi knew that suffering was the gateway to clarity. Why else would warrior monks carry boulders up mountains or stand under freezing waterfalls until their bodies nearly shut down? They weren't chasing bigger muscles. They were silencing the inner voice through pain. They were burning away fear, doubt, hesitation, until nothing remained but pure will. Musashi himself embodied this in his most famous duel against Sasaki Kojiro, Japan's most feared swordsman. Kojiro was younger, faster, armed with a deadly nodachi, a blade longer than Musashi's. By every technical measure, Kojiro should have won. But Musashi had something Kojiro didn't: total integration. He had fused body and mind into a single weapon. On the boat ride to the duel, Musashi carved a wooden sword out of an oar. To his opponent, it looked like disrespect. To the spectators, it looked insane. But to Musashi, it was perfect. His body was so strong, his will so unshakable, that he could wield this crude, heavy piece of wood with the precision of a blade. When the fight began, Kojiro swung first. Musashi dodged, countered, and with one strike of the wooden sword crushed Kojiro's skull. The duel was over in seconds. It wasn't the weapon that won. It wasn't technique alone. It was Musashi's integration. His body carried the force. His mind carried the strategy. Together, they made him unstoppable. Kojiro had skill, but Musashi had completeness, and that's why he walked away undefeated. Matthew's transformation mirrored this truth. He was no Musashi, but he didn't need to be. The lesson was the same. Once you defeat the inner voice through training, once your body and mind begin to work as one, you become a different creature. You stop hesitating. You stop second-guessing. You stop living at 40% capacity. You step into rooms and people can feel it. They can't explain it, but they know something is different. The irony, Matthew's IQ hadn't gone up a single point. His books, his knowledge, his ideas, unchanged. But now he had a body strong enough to deliver them. His intelligence finally had a vehicle. His presence finally had a foundation. His mind had finally been unchained. But Musashi knew, and Matthew was beginning to see, that transformation doesn't stop at strength, or confidence, or presence. Once you've endured enough suffering, once you've silenced the voice enough times, something deeper awakens, something beyond strategy, beyond clarity. A state Musashi called no mind, a place where body and thought dissolve into pure action. And that's where the journey was leading Matthew next. The integration, a complete man. By the end of his first year, Matthew had become someone even he didn't recognize. He wasn't a different person in the sense that his mind had changed. His knowledge, his skills, his intelligence, all of that was the same. But now, it had power behind it. His body no longer sabotaged him. His presence no longer undercut him. For the first time, his mind had an ally instead of an enemy. He had become integrated. This is what Musashi lived for. Not separation, not balance, but unity. Too many people today talk about work-life balance, or balancing the mind and the body, as if they're two different buckets you have to keep from spilling into each other. Musashi would laugh at that. For him, there was no line. The mind was the body, and the body was the mind. To divide them was to weaken both. Look at the final years of his life. Musashi retired from dueling undefeated, having killed or outwitted every opponent who dared to face him. But he didn't become a recluse, broken down by years of violence. He became an artist. His paintings hang in museums to this day, brushstrokes from the same hands that once crushed skulls with wooden swords. His poems and writings remain timeless, not because they came from a detached intellectual, but because they came from a man who had seen war, carried death, and still created beauty. Warrior and artist, destroyer and creator, body and mind. This is what society doesn't want you to understand. You are not meant to choose. You were never meant to pick between intellect and strength, between softness and hardness, between strategy and action. Those choices are false. They were given to you to keep you manageable. If you believe you can only be one, you'll never rise above mediocrity. You'll be brilliant, but powerless, or powerful, but easily controlled. Either way, you'll never threaten the system. Matthew had lived that lie for decades. He thought his intelligence was enough. He thought he could outthink his way through every obstacle. But without the body to back it up, his intelligence was just noise. It had no weight, no presence, no force. Once he united the two, everything changed. He didn't become more aggressive. Aggression is weakness, dressed up as strength. He became calm, centered, unshakable. His ideas didn't need to shout anymore, because his presence made people listen. This is the essence of integration. The harder Matthew trained his body, the clearer his mind became. The more he conquered his inner voice through suffering, the less that voice showed up in everyday life. He stopped living in the fog. He stopped overthinking. He stopped being paralyzed by the weight of his own intelligence. His thoughts now had a foundation, and that foundation was his body. Think about it. How many brilliant ideas have died because your body wasn't strong enough to execute them? How many opportunities have slipped through your fingers because you lacked the physical presence to seize them? How much of your potential is locked away because your biology is betraying your brilliance? You think this is normal, that anxiety, restlessness, fatigue and weakness are just part of life. But they're not. They're symptoms of living incomplete. Musashi wrote, "In all things have no preferences." People misinterpret this as indifference, as if Musashi was saying, "Don't care about anything." That's wrong. What he meant was simple. Don't accept false choices. Don't let the world box you into either or. Don't let them convince you that being smart means being weak, or being strong means being stupid. Take both. Claim both. Refuse to be divided. Matthew's story is proof. He didn't become smarter when he trained. He didn't discover some new mental model or intellectual trick. What he found was the missing half of himself. Once his body was strong enough to carry the weight of his ambitions, his mind finally operated at full capacity. He had been living at 40%. Now he was approaching 100. And that's the challenge Musashi leaves for you. You can stay broken in half, brilliant but weak, or strong but shallow. Or you can reclaim the completeness that every warrior, every philosopher, every creator before you lived by. The choice is simple, but not easy. It requires war. War against your excuses, against your programming, against the voice that tells you it doesn't matter. Musashi died, undefeated at 61. His legacy wasn't just 60 victories, or one famous duel. His legacy was the living proof that body and mind are one. That completeness is the only path to true power, and that every other path is a trap. So ask yourself, are you willing to keep living at half capacity, repeating the lie they fed you? Or are you ready to reclaim the other half of yourself, to unite what they divided and become complete? Because the world doesn't fear your intelligence. The world doesn't fear your strength. The world fears what happens when the two finally become one. The final call to action. Musashi died undefeated. 60 duels, countless battles, and not one loss. But that's not why his name survived centuries. Men have killed before. Men have won wars before. What set Musashi apart was that he refused to live divided. He refused to be one thing at the expense of another. He was a killer and an artist, a strategist and a poet, a destroyer and a creator. And because of that, he became untouchable. Think about the blueprint he left behind. His philosophy wasn't abstract. It wasn't trapped in theory. It was proven through action. He wrote the Book of Five Rings, not as a detached thinker, but as a man who had tested his ideas in blood, sweat, and ink. His art still hangs in museums, not because he studied beauty from a distance, but because he lived it with the same hands that held a sword. This is the truth he lived. Power doesn't come from choosing sides. It comes from refusing to accept the division in the first place. Now look at your life. Look honestly. How many times have you let yourself believe the lie? How many times have you dismissed your body as unimportant, telling yourself you're not that kind of person? How many times have you brushed off your weakness as normal, as if anxiety, restlessness, and fatigue are just part of getting older? You've been tricked into thinking this is your nature. It's not. It's not. It's programming. Every day you live divided. You hand over your potential. Every brilliant idea that dies in your head because your body can't deliver it. Every opportunity you let slip away because you don't have the confidence to seize it. Every moment you hesitate when you should act. That is the price of weakness. That is the hidden cost of believing the separation. But here's the truth. You are not broken. You are incomplete. And incompleteness is a choice. Musashi's life proves there is another way. The samurai, the Greeks, the Romans, the creators of the past all lived it. For them to be half a man was to be no man at all. Integration wasn't optional. It was survival. It was honor. It was power. So the choice is in front of you. You can stay as you are, smart but fragile, strong but shallow, operating at 40% capacity, mistaking your limitations for normal life. Or you can declare war. War on your excuses. War on your programming. War on the voice that whispers in every hard moment. Quit. You've done enough. Because if you defeat that voice in the gym, you will defeat it in life. Matthew discovered this. He didn't become a new person. He became his full self. His body stopped betraying his mind. His mind stopped strangling itself in doubt. Together they became something greater. And once he experienced that integration, he realized he could never go back. Because once you've tasted what it feels like to operate at 100%, you'll never accept living at 40% again. Musashi left you the map. 60 victories. Endless art. A philosophy that has outlived empires. The way is in training. Not in thinking alone. Not in planning. In training. In uniting what the world has torn apart. So here's the final question. Will you remain society's experiment, programmed to stay incomplete? Or will you become your own creation, fusing body and mind into something this world fears but secretly craves? Because the world does not need more geniuses trapped in fragile bodies. It does not need more strong men without wisdom. It needs the complete man. The man who thinks and acts, who plans and executes, who creates and destroys, who carries his mind in a body powerful enough to deliver it. You can start tomorrow morning. One push-up, one squat, one step into the war you've been avoiding. Or you can stay as you are, half of yourself forever, wondering what you could have been if you'd chosen differently. Musashi showed the way. The blueprint exists. The question is no longer how. The question is, will you stay divided? Or will you finally become whole?